Hello everybody and welcome to Tech Talk. I want to talk to you about a car that I found incredibly confounding and frankly a little bit frustrating all season long. I am of course talking about the Mercedes. The Mercedes this year has either been struggling or winning races. It's a strange car that doesn't seem to have a consistent pattern of form throughout the season, less consistent than pretty much every other car on the grid. For example, the Williams, which of course uses the same power unit, is always good on high-speed circuits, but not so good on other tracks. Whereas the Mercedes just seems to work differently in different conditions, whether it's hot or cold. It's a little bit hard to predict. So to take a little bit of a more detailed look at the car, I thought we'd wind everything back all the way to the start of the season, where James Allison, one of the senior engineers in the team, reviewed the first few races of how the car was getting on and what made it different to previous Mercedes of this rule set.
I mean, it's a more positive feeling than the last few years, for sure. We've got a well-behaved car. It's not confusing us as we had been confused in previous seasons.
You mentioned the better understanding that you've got with this package. When you're trying to make those inroads, does it feel like the path is slightly clearer than it has been in recent years?
Absolutely, because although if you make a big mess of things, then you can make significant steps moving it forward, you also waste a huge amount of time scratching your head, trying to understand what it is that's given rise to the things that have confused you. Whereas the car we've got now, it's well balanced, it behaves well on a range of different surfaces, range of different tracks, wet or dry, and therefore all the things that we do to make it quicker, we can be pretty confident are going to make it quicker. And that's a considerable relief.
And I know this might be an impossible question, it probably is every time you get asked it, but obviously you're trying to dovetail 25 and 26.
Yeah.
You've got this performance in the car this year, first time for a few years, so you probably want to chase that, but balance it with not kind of letting too much go for 26, because that's the real big step. How's that kind of unfurling itself?
That's F1's eternal dilemma. You know, you either want to be unbelievably brilliant, in which case you don't have to do anything, or really terrible, in which case it doesn't matter if you don't do anything, and you can just focus on the future. If you're sort of a bit in the middle, then you have to hedge your bets slightly. We've got a decent car this year. We need to make sure that we bring a significant set of upgrade packages to it so that hopefully we can put pressure on McLaren in front, hopefully build a gap to Ferrari and to Red Bull in the process. But we'd be morons not to also keep in mind that 2026 is this enormous challenge that necessarily is going to take the lion's share of our attention.
Well, it's fair to say that Mercedes had a pretty strong opening to the season. While they didn't win any races, there were a smattering of podium finishes, though Monaco was something of a low point for the team. Canada was something of a high point where the team won the Grand Prix. There were some interesting details all over the car, and one that really caught my eye early on in the season was underneath the hump on the nose. You can see it here on Kimi Antonelli's car. This big hump that appeared on the tip of the nose. Now you can see here that it's got a cover covering up the driver cooling duct that all of the cars have at the start of the season and can use at hotter races. However, at some races, Mercedes had no intention of opening up that cooling duct, but they put a fake duct over that hump on the tip of the nose, which says to me that that hump serves more of a purpose than just driver cooling. But anyway, let's get back to the reason that Mercedes had a bit of a hump, and certainly the drivers got the hump in the middle of the season. After the Belgian Grand Prix, both Kimi Antonelli and George Russell demanded a meeting with the technical leads at the Mercedes team because they were really unhappy with the way the car was handling. Let's hear from Andrew Shovlin about what was discussed.
We have regular development meetings with them anyway, and this one had been scheduled, but obviously the topics of it changed a bit based on struggles we'd had in recent races. What we were mainly wanting to get from them was a sort of clear description of exactly all the issues that they're feeling. We were, looking back at the early races and data from those, looking at the recent ones, trying to understand the things that had changed. Now, I wouldn't say an outcome of that meeting was that we decided to revert on the suspension spec, because we'd actually decided to do that prior to the meeting. But it's really just to try and, obviously it's been a difficult time for the team and the drivers over the last few races. we're trying to give them as much information as we can to help them understand what we're doing as the next steps, and also what we've learned from the investigations over the last fortnight or so. But as I said, it's that meeting's a normal part of working with them. But we'll understand here whether that move to revert the suspension spec is actually going to solve some of those problems.
Got you. So I think I'm right in saying that you've kind of moved around with them this year, haven't you? So you've run them at different times. So it's not unusual for you to do this, is it?
To be honest, we hadn't wanted to be bouncing around on suspension specification. The dream world is that you develop an update, you put it on the car, you might have it for a Friday to check it out, and then you introduce it at a race, and that it makes the car quicker and you can just run that throughout. Now, this suspension, we had concerns after we introduced it in Imola. We then took it off for the 2 following races, and perhaps inconveniently, we put it back on for Montreal, where we were on pole and we won. And that was the best race of the year. Now, we weren't naive enough to think that Montreal is the perfect sign-off for anything, because it's a very unique track. It's only got slow speed corners in it. But equally, we felt that it probably can't be too flawed if you can then go and get a good result or if that is your best result. So, maybe that tripped us up a little bit. We've had a run of wet races recently, and we were also embarking on some setup experiments in Austria that maybe it's muddied the waters a bit. But what was clear looking at the last 2 was the confidence the drivers had in the fast corners simply wasn't where they had at the start of the year, which was why we've then taken the decision to remove it again.
When this kind of thing happens, where maybe you put something on the car and it kind of doesn't deliver what you were hoping it would do, how much does that put you back? I know there's always learnings to be gained, but how much does it put you back?
It affects both your performance, obviously. If you're in a cost cap environment and you've invested in a development item that doesn't then remain on the car, that is wasted resource. As you can sort of hear by description of, we put it on the car, we took it off, we put it back on, we've taken it off. There's an element of sort of confusion and muddying the waters when you're bouncing around on car spec that makes it more difficult for the drivers and the engineers to land everything in the same place. And then it obviously knocks your confidence and your morale a bit, because when you're on a development role and everything's delivering, it's great, and everyone's pushing to bring things to the car, and you see that the performance is ratcheting up with every weekend. When you get the opposite, it is frustrating.
Well, one of the key changes made to the car following that crunch meeting at Brackley between the drivers and the technical leads at Mercedes was to the suspension layout of the car, and the different drivers preferred different suspension solutions as the season went on. Antonelli and Russell sometimes going different directions. Similar story, of course, at McLaren. But one of the changes to the suspension that I really like, that's very visual, are these aerodynamic shrouds on the inner pickup points where the wishbones at the front of the car meet the main chassis of the car. And this isn't unique to Mercedes. Quite a few teams, Red Bull and McLaren, had similar solutions. I just really like it. It's just that little bit of extra aerodynamic downforce generation, I think, looking at the wing section shape of that little shroud around the pickup point. Just a really nice little engineering detail of the car. But Andrew Shovlin does have more to say about the changes made to the car later in the season.
Well, we played around with the setup across the start of the year. We had a decent position for the early races. We were able to fight for podiums more or less at every track. As you well know, we lost our way a bit with a rear suspension update that caused problems at some circuits. And that needed a little bit of unpicking, but we do seem to have sort of recovered the dry land now, and it's been encouraging in the last few races. We've been able to land a setup in FP1 that works pretty well, that the drivers can chip away at it and find time. But what you're seeing is the swings of competitiveness from team to team, track to track. Ferrari looked pretty strong in Mexico. We were obviously strong in Singapore. Hopefully we'll have more races where we can compete right at the front this year.
You mentioned the rear suspension changes there. Was that the biggest headache for you this year? Can you give us a bit more background on how that all unfolded and the route that you ultimately took?
Well, probably it was the biggest headache, and we had it on the car in Imola, and we identified then that it was something that could be causing issues, so we took it off. The most inconvenient thing was the race we reintroduced it was Montreal, where we were on pole and we won. So we incorrectly gave it a clean bill of health at that point. What we then found was when we were at some of the faster circuits, Spa and places like that, it was definitely causing issues in high-speed corners, and we reverted for Budapest. Now that's unfortunate, because not only did we probably negatively affect a number of races, and it certainly was confusing for Kimi, who's sort of learning his trade as a Formula One driver, but also a fair bit of resource got spent on that ultimately is wasted.
One car worth taking a look at when you take a look at the Mercedes is the World Championship winning McLaren, because both cars share the same power unit, but they don't share very much else. Certainly the car concepts are pretty different. The same sort of tools are available to both McLaren and Mercedes, but the two teams of engineers have taken very different routes with the silver car and the orange, or is it papaya car? And to take a look at those differences, Andrew Shovlin just did take a little bit of a look at that rival team and where McLaren have got it right and where Mercedes might have got it a little wrong.
Well, I mean, they obviously launched with a very, very well sorted car. They were strong in winter testing. We could see that. They were very strong in the early races, and particularly they seem to be the benchmark at the rear overheating tracks. Now, we're obviously looking at what other people are doing, and that was used to set some challenging targets for ourselves on finding a bit more performance on those sorts of tracks, whether we can try and get the tyres to run a little bit cooler. And it is encouraging that in the recent race, some of those real overheating tracks, and Singapore is certainly one of those, where we've been able to match them. So I think we've made good progress ourselves. But if you look at McLaren, what they did really well was managing to launch with a very, very well sorted car that was very competitive, that was working well over a range of tracks.
And the Mercedes power unit in the back of it, of course, as well. How satisfied are you with the performance of the PU this year? Sort of the plus points, maybe areas that you felt were slightly below expectation?
Well, I mean, if we're pleased for McLaren. We would certainly rather have a Mercedes engine in the back of the car that wins a championship, but we would also like a Mercedes car in front of it. So. Good for them, but we need to do a better job. We need to work harder, and that's certainly what we've focused on. But as this area of the regulations with the V6 turbos comes to an end, you would say that Mercedes in Brixworth have done an amazing job with that power unit. They started with the most competitive. They finished, even though everyone's closed up, with the most competitive power unit, and it's just been down to hard work, dedication, and just relentless focus on performance.
Coming up to the end of the season, the penultimate round at the Qatar Grand Prix, Andrew Shovlin took a little bit of extra time out to review the Mercedes season so far, what's gone right and what's not gone so right. And I think it's really interesting to see how the Mercedes at the end of the season compares to its other challengers at the front of the field, because it's fair to say towards the end of 2025 the Mercedes has become one of the regular front runners and is regularly threatening for race wins and pole positions, even if it doesn't quite always get there. Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, I think in a way we've actually engineered the car to have less standout strengths and just be a better all-round car, and perhaps you can see that by the fact that we've only won 2 races this year versus 4 last year, but we're in a much better position in the championship P2 rather than P4. But whether you look at us, Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, the speed trace in terms of where do we sit in a straight line, low speed corners, high speed corners, there's very little difference, and that's what you need for championships. So as I said, I wouldn't really look at our car now and say, we're going to be good at this track. You could say we were good in, we were okay in Baku, we were good in Montreal, we were good in Singapore. Well, those are the straight line braking circuits, but they're done for the year now. So we'll see how we fare in the next 2, but hopefully we can continue the sort of momentum we had from Brazil and Las Vegas into the 2 remaining rounds.
considering all of that, I know you want to be world champions, that's what F1 is all about, but what would P2 in the championship mean for the team with all of that considered?
You know, we'll be pleased to finish P2 because it's a lot better than finishing P3 and P4. However, you know, there's an awful lot of challenge wrapped up in next year's regulations. A lot of, you know, you'll be fighting on a lot of different fronts of car performance, and we're well aware of the fact that we've had a sort of sound thrashing from McLaren this year. It's nice to see that a Mercedes engine wins the championship, but it's, you know, we've got to reflect on the fact that we got beaten by a car with the same power unit in the back. So, you know, P2, as I said, better than P3, P4, but we, you know, we are a team that exists to win championships. That's the only goal that we've got, and you know, long term, that's where we need to get ourselves back to.
I think Mercedes might be a little bit happy to see the end of this rulebook. Their cars between 2022 and 2025 have been, well, it's fair to say, a little bit beaverish. They haven't consistently worked, and Mercedes never really found its feet all the way through this set of regulations, certainly not in the way it did up to the end of 2021. However, with the new rules coming in, it might suit Mercedes and its drivers a little bit better than the current regulations, and we'll have to take a look to see how that goes when the new season starts early next year. And I'm looking forward to that, probably even more than Mercedes are.